Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Yu, and I'm the Curator of Public Programs at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Today's program features the co-curators of Construction Occupation, an exhibition currently on view at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Drawing from their collaborative research in Brazil and beyond, Ungprateeb Flynn and Juliana Caffé will highlight key works from the exhibition and explore how art intersects with power, infrastructure, and the politics of spatial justice. Their conversation will offer insight into how collective action and artistic intervention can shape cities and public life. A quick introduction to our speakers. Ungprateeb Flynn is Associate Professor and Graduate Vice Chair in UCLA's Department of World Arts and Cultures, Dance. His work bridges the arts and social sciences, focusing on how artistic expression, especially in Brazil, can drive social change, reimagine community, and challenge dominant narratives. Juliana Caffé is an independent curator and researcher based in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She holds a PhD in arts with a focus on art history and has curated exhibitions across Latin America, Africa, and Europe. We are thrilled to have them both with us today. Before we begin, a quick reminder. If you have questions during the program, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also upvote questions you'd like to have here answered, and we'll get to as many as we can. And now I'll hand it over to Alex and Juliana.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this public program on the exhibition Construction Occupation. My name is Alex Ungprateeb Flynn. Thanks, Hannah, so much for this really kind introduction. And it's actually our pleasure, to be able to speak about this exhibition with you today. The exhibition runs through till January, the 11th, 2026. So if you haven't had the opportunity yet to go check it out, please do. It's something that we kind of worked on for a very long time. And let me just quickly pass over to Juliana, and then then we'll start a little bit talking about the exhibition, and we'll go through some slides with as well, some images.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and share with you a little bit about the exhibition, Construction Occupation. Thank you, Hannah and Alex, and hope you can see the show. And yeah, let's start.
So I guess we could speak a little bit briefly about the show before we sort of start talking about the works themselves. Construction Occupation is an exhibition that we really began putting together, I think, in 2016. That's when we first started working on it. Juliana and I, we already knew each other. And also, as a curatorial team, our third co-curator unfortunately couldn't join us today, Yuji Rafael. But we worked really closely, and we have been working so closely over these past almost 10 years in a really kind of non-hierarchical, collaborative way. And we all sort of tried to bring something different to this project. And it has different connotations, different valences, which, people who are walking through the show might be able to pick up, on the kind of, the kind of different things that we brought. So we do have some slides here that we can share. Just to give you an idea, those of you who've, not had the opportunity to see the show, the title of the talk today is Building Resistance, and that's very much something that we were trying to seek to do. I think that, beginning in 2016, this was our place of work. So this building that you see here is the former Hotel Cambridge. So the Hotel Cambridge was actually in the 1950s a luxury hotel. So celebrities like Bing Crosby and some kind of probably quite, I don't know, members of various royal families kind of stayed there in downtown Sao Paulo. And as downtown Sao Paulo changed, a lot like a lot of US cities, the downtown kind of emptied out. And as the neighborhood changed, the building also changed. So it went from being this kind of really luxury hotel, which was really well known for this sort of jazz kind of bar on the kind of the top of the building, which had this amazing view over the city. It went from being that to kind of being the sort of hotel that charges by the hour, and then finally became a nightclub. And then it was abandoned by its owner. That happened in the kind of the early 2000s, this process of abandonment. The building was subsequently occupied in 2008 by a movement called the Downtown Homeless Movement, which in Brazil is called the MSTC, the Movimento dos Trabalhadores Sem Teto do Centro. And the building was kind of really like refitted by 170 more or less families that were being coordinated by this social movement, and a social movement entirely kind of connected to the idea of the right to a home. So the idea of the in the Brazilian constitution, um, it's which is a document came about. It was finalized in 1988. It states really clearly that the state has the responsibility to provide everyone with a home. And the families that occupied this abandoned building in 2008, they were very, very well organized. They were kind of quite diverse families. There were families kind of low wage income, people who were formerly homeless, um, refugees, people from Angola, people from Mozambique, people from Haiti. And they took part in this incredible transformation of the building in this kind of first stage. They emptied out 8 tons of trash. They rewired the whole building. They put the pipes back into it because the whole building had been totally stripped. And that's how, like, from 2008 onwards, the building came to house this 170 families. So over 500 people living collectively in this space. And that's kind of when we got involved. Like a few years later, so the building was abandoned in 2008. The occupation was kind of really, kind of complete and up and running in 2012. And then in 2016, this movement, the MSTC, asked Juliana to think about putting together an artistic proposal to work inside the building. Juliana subsequently kind of recruited Yuji Rafael and then myself, and we became this three-person team thinking how to work in this really unique space. So as you can see from the image here, this is like a 17-story building in downtown Sao Paulo. No elevator. So a lot of kind of like, like very intense dialogue with the families living there, and of course the social movement that was organizing the space. And what that kind of discussion focused on was what what kind of artistic proposal might be interesting in this environment, in this really particular kind of environment. And so the proposal was put forward to do an artistic residency. So the idea was really to kind of create to have a selection of artists. So there were actually 5 artists in residency over this projected year that we would be working there. We actually ended up working there for a bit longer than a year. And these 5 artists, which were 2 of whom were working as a duo, the artists in residence would be in this really kind of close contact with these families living in this space. And the idea was really to think about like what is the kind of what is the cultural potential of thinking about the reconfiguration of the city? Like what role, does or can art play in the reshaping of the spaces in which we live? And of course, at a broad level, like what is this relationship between art and activism? Like what does it mean for artists to work in a really kind of hands-on way with families who are dealing with really, really practical um, questions to do with cost of living, to do with getting by from day to day, coming back from work, after a really long day and then taking part in all these artistic activities. So our curatorial method really at this stage, and here, you can see like a photo of us like when we're much younger, like I think we're kind of this is like this is 2000, this is 2016, I think, like just after the inauguration of the residency. And here we are sitting on the steps of the building. So, a few more gray hairs like later on, and perhaps a few pounds as well. We kind of, you know, we were thinking about like what is kind of an interesting and an appropriate and ethically appropriate way to work curatorially in this kind of space. Um, Especially like working in this kind of space in which so many people were beginning to transit. So the occupation really started off as a kind of a very almost like a fortress kind of space because there was a fear and a very, justifiable fear from the families that there would be expulsion order, removal order, that the police would try and take the building back, that they would suffer like police consequences. But as we kind of developed the curatorial program and worked with the artists in residence, the series of activities that happened over that period from 2016 to 2017 was just the most incredible dynamic. It became the most incredible dynamic space. It's important to say that the MSTC, the social movement, they were already organizing a lot of connections and events and trying to kind of make more clear like their case for reappropriating this building. That they had turned an abandoned building upon which the owner of the building owed millions of dollars in unpaid property tax. They turned this abandoned building into this productive social space. And we really sought to kind of echo and work with the movement in that sense. So we weren't sort of trying to strike out and do something really, really, really different and so on. We were really seeking to echo and work with the forms that had already been kind of sort of proposed in a sort of an embryonic way by the social movement and of course the residents of this building. And of course, the more time we spent in that building, we were there every single day for over a year. We got to know those people living there really, really well. And we got to know how they thought about politics, how they thought about life, how they thought about art, right? And what kind of artistic processes or initiatives might be kind of appropriate and interesting and stimulating. And so here you can see on this slide like a few of the activities that happened in that space, and there were so many of them. Um, Top left, you can see Edgar Callel. He put forward a series of workshops around art and the artist, and the comparison or the connection that you can make between the artist and the migrant. So Callel is he's Cachiquel, he's an indigenous artist from Guatemala. And at this time when he was in the building with us, there were a lot of people, as I sort of said, from different backgrounds in the building. And working with this kind of really varied community, this really diverse community, this was something that I think was really important to us and the artists that we were working with. Then you can also see like a Catonera workshop that features in the exhibition. You can see a series of dinners that happened, um, a series of talks about how race intersects with segregation in the city. The photo on the bottom in the middle is a political talk given by Fernando Haddad, who is the Brazilian Secretary to the Treasury. So he's second only to Brazilian president. And he came and gave a campaign speech in the building. So little by little, the building really opened up and became this kind of transit, this point of transit, this point of circulation and connection, where all sorts of different people were meeting. And I think for us, this was something that was really fascinating to be able to work on and to be able to stimulate. Like, in what sense could art provoke, this space of encounter? What might happen in those spaces of encounters? Because, just like in LA, in Sao Paulo, homelessness and the unhoused community, it's a really polemic question. There's a lot of people who believe that you only deserve a home if you work for it. And they don't really take into account, like what happens with when people are made redundant or people fall upon hard times. And in working with this project, what we noticed was that the artistic activities that we were putting forward, the debates, the talks, the cinema clubs, the psychological support sessions that were part of co-curators artistic residency, what we noticed was that a space for dialogue was being created, a space in which these really difficult questions could actually be discussed and explored, and perhaps in a less kind of polemic way. So this was something really important for us, I think. And of course, works began to appear in the space as well. So here you can see a couple of light boxes that were developed by one of the artists in residence, Rafael Escobar. And Ju will talk a little bit more about Rafael Escobar's work in the exhibition later on. And on the right-hand side, another artist in residence. This was her exhibition, Alma de Bronze, which is Virginia de Medeiros' exhibition, which took place in not the Hotel Cambridge occupied building, but another occupied building about 400 yards away, occupied and organized by the same movement. The building is called the 9th of July, 9 de Julio. So through this series of artistic activities, we really came to kind of create this connection with people who are living in the building, and also to, as curators, to think about how to facilitate the relationship between the artists in residence and the social movement, the wider public, and the people living in the space. And it had an incredibly transformative effect. So what you see in this slide is the Hotel Cambridge being redeveloped. So this was happening the whole time that we were working there. And the residency that we articulated at the time generated a lot of public interest. So we were on the news, we were on, front page in all the newspapers, the broadsheets. This kind of idea of like, what kind of cultural activity is being produced by this community, and the social movement had put in for federal funding, so they were awarded subsequently in 2019 almost $4 million in federal funding from the Brazilian federal government to redevelop the Hotel Cambridge. And so what was an occupation, which was very kind of precarious in the sense that people were living in, precarious conditions. And of course, the space was a hotel originally. So the building plan was worked out for a hotel. What we saw was the building being transformed into proper social housing. And that social housing redevelopment resulted in a building now which has 121 units of social housing. And many of the people who occupied the space in 2012, they now own the apartments that they in this in the social housing development now. So this is the most incredible trajectory, and it was an amazing privilege to as a curatorial team to be shown the building site, to walk through the building, and to just reflect upon, wow, how much things have changed. And so one of the things that we were also kind of interested in as curators is, of course, the transformative potential of art. And I'm really in no doubt as to that potential, because having been in that space and seen what it was and then seen what it subsequently became, there's this that discursive space that was created, the possibility to discuss these solutions which are kind of out of the box solutions, something that people hadn't been thinking about before. I think this was really powerful to witness. And one of our kind of questions then was to think about, well, what might this whole process and our curatorial method, like what kind of exhibition might that result in? And this was something that we thought about for a long time. We began thinking sincerely and really earnestly about it. I think after the building had been converted, the original building in Sao Paulo had been converted into social housing. And we began thinking about what were the connections that this project proposed to a city like LA, with its own housing crisis, with its own, huge number of abandoned buildings sitting in downtown. But we really became aware of thinking. We began to think about what would this look like in an exhibition space. And yeah, I'll hand over to Juliana here.
Well, thank you, Alex. Yeah, I will start with your end. We start to think about how to create an exhibition. So we explore in construction occupation this relationship between art activists and social movements in the city. And we depart from this experience in Cambridge in 2016, and we bring to the exhibition, we highlight in the exhibition 3 other emblematic occupations in São Paulo, where we had this connection between artists and the social movement. That was the Prestes Maia in the 2000s, then Cambridge in the 2016, and nowadays the 9 de Julho, as Alex said. So this first work, it's a work from a collective named Bijari. And yeah. And then, well, Bijari, it's a collective of artists. We had in the beginning of the 2000s a lot of collective of artists being formed, artists that was at that time, they wanted to refuse the gallery and work with the city, and they begin to work with some social movements. So in this work, we have these posters that we have like the definition of gentrification. They usually put these posters around city, around empty buildings or places that was suffering gentrification. And they get close to Prestes Maia. A lot of collectives started to work with this occupation. Prestes Maia, we have some of them in the exhibition. And in this video, there is a documentation of an intervention of the collective on the building when the police was forced an eviction. So the police was forcing an eviction, and they form the number 168 in the street. That is the number of families that was living there. So they formed this number on the street with these posters, gentrificado. And then when the news was filming this moment, the intervention goes to the television. So this kind of intervention in the television at this time in Brazil, in São Paulo, we have some collectives doing that. And so this is this work of Bijari. They did this video where they bring the way the journalists speak about the movement, criminalizing this movement, and they create a counter narrative inside the program and also in the work. Sorry for my English. I hope everyone is understanding. Yeah, I think we can maybe go to the next, but I think that yes. So this is Prestes Maia. This is the building Prestes Maia in the beginning of the 2000s. And Zumbi Somos Nós, We Are Zombies in English, is a work from Frente 3 de Fevereiro, another collective that is in the exhibition with a video work. And they have a similar tactic of they put these huge flags on the building or in the football games, in the stadiums. So this message began to enter in the television, in the record. So like a virus, forming a counter narrative. So usually Frente 3 is speaking about racial injustice in Brazil and drawing attention to racial injustice. And they also work with urban interventions and videos and so on. I think we have another picture of Explode. We can speak later if you want to speak up. Yeah. So yeah. Here in the right, we have another work from Bijari. They went to Los Angeles in 2007, I think, and they did a residency, and then they make this map about the immigrants in United States. So it's like a game about the life of an immigrant in US. And we thought that was really interesting to bring to the exhibition because we can discuss there is a lot of similarities between the cities and yeah. And then we have work by Preta Ferreira. It's a really important artist in the exhibition because she's a leader of the movement, and she was imprisoned in a very injustice way, and this reveals like the authorities trying to criminalize the movement and her role of her leadership. And she's a singer, so she made a lot of clips and with Black, indigenous, trans women, combine art and activism, and celebrating resistance and freedom and solidarity. So she's a really important person, and she has a lot of videos about her music in the exhibition. Yes, and then we have this work of Contrafilet. It's another collective from the early 2000s, and we bring them with this piece that has a lot of connection to LA. It's a picture of a monument that they did for the turnstile. The title is Monument to the Invisible Turnstile. So they did this monument, and they placed this monument in a very center, in a park in the center city of São Paulo, bringing this, provoking this debate about the accessibility to the transportation. The access to the public transportation, and that it's and at the time was very debating in the newspaper, university exams, and everybody was talking about it. Was a piece that was an intervention in the city, and that provoked a lot of discussions, and yeah. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. And we invite another artist to work in the exhibition, that is João Simões, that also he was living in California, and he also produced a work about the public transportation, about the racial issue of you always is late in LA if you don't have a car. I think Alex can speak better about this work, but just linking.
Yeah, just jumping in, like here, I don't know if people kind of saw, like, but in the previous slide, you can see like that on the floor, we have these vinyls on the floor. And the exhibition design of the show was something really important to us. Like we worked with an expedition design with a firm of architects who did the La Sao Paulo Bienal. And Juliana, if I'm not mistaken, like we bumped into them in a bar in Sao Paulo, right? And everyone was having a drink. And there was this opportunity to kind of go up to them and basically say, hey, you guys are doing great work. We're going to do a show in LA. Do you want to do it? And that's how basically they ended up signing on, right? It was kind of quite a sort of fortunate kind of coincidence. And they did this really amazing work with us, like thinking about the concept of the show. So you can see the vinyls on the floor, and the kind of the way the exhibition layout is done. You've got these kinds of room spaces. And so if we kind of look at the next slide here, um, let's see, I'm losing my arrow pointer here. What you have here is basically two architectural plans. And these are works in the exhibition. These are works by the architecture firm Peabiru. So Peabiru, they were the architects responsible for the redevelopment of the Hotel Cambridge building. So on the left, what you see is the floor plan of the building as a hotel, right? So that's the original floor plan. And on the right, what you see is the social housing project that it became and that it is currently now. So you can see that more or less the structure, of course, stays the same. But of course, the social housing, it's made for social housing, it's made for families. So there are rooms with bathrooms and so on and so on and so forth. Now, what we noticed when we were working with the exhibition design with the architects was that one wing of this building, and that's what you see, you see two wings of the building in the architectural plan with the staircase and the elevators in the middle. One wing of the building was almost exactly the same size as the gallery in the Fowler Museum, the Lucas Gallery. So that's where Vaux architecture firm had this amazing idea, which was to take one wing of the building and to use this architectural plan of the social housing building development and to put this on a one-to-one scale into the museum gallery. So when you're walking around the exhibition, construction occupation, you are walking around the exact spaces and the exact rooms of the building from which the works came and are connected. So if we just go back a little bit, like the vinyls that you see on the floor are where the walls would be, right? Because obviously we had to take out quite a lot of walls because otherwise it would be too close to space and so on. But the walls are represented on the floor by the vinyls, and the walls you see in the exhibition design are the actual walls exactly to the inch of the social housing development in Brazil. So this was important for us for a couple of reasons. Like number one, Sao Paulo is a long way away from LA, and a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to go to Sao Paulo. It's a long way away, it's an expensive flight. And so we were really kind of faced with this challenge of like, how do we bring Sao Paulo to LA? How do we make that connection between these two cities, which a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think to connect, offhand. But when we were doing our research for the show, what we understood was that there are so many things that connect Sao Paulo and LA. Like they're two of the biggest cities in their respective hemispheres, north and south of the Americas. They're cities which are characterized by a very particular kind of geographical dimension, redlining in LA, and a very, very similar process that occurred in Sao Paulo, which ensured racially segregated neighborhoods. They both have subterranean rivers. So in fact, where the Cambridge building it stands is on the banks of a former river, which has been put underground, exactly like the LA River. And this process of the military engineers was actually applied in both cities. Sao Paulo and LA also have this unhoused question, the unhoused population question as well. They have, respectively about 80, 90,000 people who are on the streets, unhoused, and they both face that big challenge. So, this results in, for example, in LA, a neighborhood like Skid Row, and in Sao Paulo, there's an exactly equivalent neighborhood called Cracolândia, which is again downtown Sao Paulo. It's right next to an arts district. It is visually very, very similar. Um, So we were really working with this idea of how to connect the two cities in this kind of more like through the logic of a visual language. Like what were the kind of visual kind of connections and aesthetic kind of interstitial spaces that we could explore. And the architectural design was really part of it. It was part of being able to bring people into those spaces and to have that very strong communication with what is essentially a really, really site-specific exhibition. The works that were created for it were created in a very site-specific way. They're all connected. All the artists are connected to the building in which we worked. So just as a sort of a recap, there are 24 artists and collectives in the show. All but one are Brazilian artists, and they all passed through this building and had this direct contact with the families and the social movement. So for us, that was a really, really important site-specific connection that had to be reflected in the exhibition. And the way to do this, one of the ways, was through the exhibition design. So, for those of you who had the opportunity to visit the show, or perhaps those of you who haven't, if you haven't had the chance, like go check out the way that, as you're walking through the exhibition, you can actually map where you are in these apartments on the architectural blueprint, which really, I think, reinforces that strong connection between the space and the work. And of course, speaking about the work, there's um there's a couple of things that I'd really like to cover, like just briefly, which is that obviously when you're working with questions of the city, there's a lot of, it's important to cover the kind of the textures of the city. So just skipping forward a few slides here, one artist that really does this well is Andre Komatsu. So you see here the kind of the fragmented concrete, these works, The Dream and the Empire. And these works were created in situ and they were broken in situ. So you can see the fragments of the concrete that lie on the floor. And this is the texture of the city. Andre Komatsu reveals the kind of what lies under the skin of the city. Right? That's the feel, the granular feel of the city. And of course, with the exhibition design, it's all about that kind of, architectural plan and those clean lines. But for us, there was something really important about our work and also about the artist's work that we felt was speaking in a sort of there was a through line there, which was that the city and the kind of connection that art has to the city isn't just about these textures or just about the straight lines. If we kind of zip back a little bit, something else that's really important is, something that always, I think, puzzled me, certainly when I was in the occupation space, was how do families, working families, how do they sustain themselves over that long period of time? They occupied in 2012 and they didn't get the keys to the apartment until most of them until 2022. And what is it that keeps you going over that 10-year period? What is that kind of power that keeps people believing and keeps people together? Because this was a collective struggle, 170 families together. And this became something that we wanted to kind of think about, which was what are the contours of that collective dream? What does it mean to dream collectively in that sense? And to explore how that collectivity and that belief in something together was really the necessary precursor or the kind of the foundations, if you like, to all the actual construction in a more material sense that occurred later on. Because when the redevelopment of the building happened, of course, it was a really significant moment, but actually, I think we all felt that it was something that had been really building for so many years. And we had been part of that as curators working in that space. And so I'd just like to briefly highlight three works that really speak to that kind of collective dream notion. So the first work here you see is Edgar Calel. Calel, Cachiquel artist from Guatemala. And of course, Calel is really blown up. He's done these huge exhibitions. He's everywhere. He's in Sculpture Center. He's in every biennale around the world right now. And this is actually goes back to one of his earliest works, which is a series of cardboard boxes. And you might be able to see that they're branded with Suavitel, which is Latin American. I think it does actually make its way to the US as well. Brand of kind of detergent and laundry products and so on. And these are boxes from Guatemala. It was very important for Kalal that these works transit the US frontier and go through customs and to touch on those migration questions that we mentioned before. And of course, inside the boxes is something really unique and unexpected. What you have is these clouds, these skyscapes, and these motifs of growing corn. And the growing corn comes from Kalal's collaboration with an indigenous community in Sao Paulo, a Guarani and Biá community that sits on demarcated land, like within the city itself. And they work to preserve indigenous seeds, which are non-GMO, and these are the corns that grow from those seeds. And so I think for Kalel, there was something really that entranced us about this work, which was, a very mundane industrial box with an industrial stencil, a cardboard texture, which you see throughout the city everywhere you go. When you start looking for it, it's absolutely everywhere. But inside, something unique and unexpected, this kind of flowering of a dream, this aspiration, this kind of process of growing. And this is something that also we find echoed in this work, this ceiling lamp here that you can see by Noada Quintana. So this lamp that you see here in this main room, again, it kind of forces you to look upward. So when you go to the exhibition, you have to stand under this sculpture. And as people gaze at it, what we notice is they gaze collectively. And this is that kind of tangible sort of aesthetic realization, if you like, of this collective dream. The artist was inspired by a song, a popular song from Brazil, which talks about families who live in precarious housing using kind of corrugated roofing panels with, full of holes, that they lie on their floor and they gaze up at their roof, and through the holes in the ceiling, they can glimpse the stars. And it's that kind of notion of looking up, looking to try and build something for you and your family, that Noada Quintana really speaks to here. The motifs on the work themselves are botanical motifs, which echo another of the works in this main room, which is the 9 de Julio, the kitchen. And it speaks also to what people do with occupied space. So, of course, those of you in LA, you may or not know that during the pandemic, one of the most important occupations that happened in LA was the occupation of Echo Park. And one of the initiatives in that occupation was the planting of a communal garden, a communal medicinal garden. And then the third work to speak about just very briefly is Cynthia Marcelli's chair, her school chair. So what you see here is a chair which is actually from the UCLA Department of Theatre, Film and Television. It's a homage to the LA Rebellion, the filmmakers black filmmakers from the 60s and 70s, early 80s. And Cynthia Marcelli's chair, it kind of is balanced on pieces of chalk. And sometimes it falls over. When people kind of walking through the exhibition, the chair falls over. And next to the chair, you have a clipboard which has instructions on how to rebalance the chair on the pieces of chalk. And this is kind of a work which is very important for us because it speaks to the school and the idea of high school students occupying their schools, but also this kind of very precarious balance, that's always at play in these processes between artists and activists, between social struggles and the forces that sort of seek to shut them down, between, the tensions, of course, in a building that, arise over those years. So everything's held together by a very delicate balance. And I think that's something that Cynthia's work really sort of, for me, certainly speaks to. So yeah, like just kind of picking up briefly on a question, like thank you, Phyllis, for your question. The question is, how long did it take to formulate and present this exhibit? And Juliana, would you like to sort of answer that question? I can also jump in as well if you like.
Well, I think we are working since 2020. like it depends actually, right? I don't know, like 2 years, I would say, for this exhibition, because the work with Cambridge residency we are doing since 2016.
Yeah, I think formalizing the exhibition and it was wonderful to work with the Fowler Museum. We're guest curators at the Fowler Museum, and we found a really warm welcome from everyone there. This really productive conversations in terms of production, in terms of curatorial, in terms of public program, in terms of outreach, all of these different aspects. And it took, yeah, I would say since 2020 to develop the show. So, putting together an exhibit like this, it goes through a lot of different iterations. And I think one of our kind of first questions that we had to answer and we discussed a lot with the museum was, what's the scope of the artists included in the show? So in the end, we decided to work with just artists from Brazil and obviously Kal-El as well, like who would pass through the building, and to try and create connections to Los Angeles in different ways, as opposed to putting like artists from Los Angeles who address these questions, of which there are many and doing great work, directly into dialogue with the works in this space. So yeah, it took us a good like 4 or 5 years. And there's also another question here from Annie. So the exhibition foregrounds the idea of occupation as both a political and artistic act. Much of this exhibition is rooted in research with Brazilian artists and collectives. How do you approach the balance between showcasing individual artistic voices and highlighting collective or community-based practices in the exhibition? Juliana, do you want to jump in on that one?
Hi, Annie. Thank you for your question. It's really interesting because I like very much the fact that we have a lot of collectives in the exhibition. And I think that this reflects the very issue that we are discussing in the show, because usually um, we are speaking about social movement that is a collective of people and collective of artists. That's a lot of people that are getting together with these places to also work together. So it's a lot of collectives. And I think that this is reflect uh, the relationship between art and city, and um, when we are speaking about politics and arts and cities, I think that the collective it's really strong, and the fact that we have a lot of collectives reflect this. Was not we didn't say let's work only with collectives. No, it was really natural because um, the people that are working with the social movement usually it's collectives. And we have some artists that was in the residency in the Cambridge, and as Escobar, and also Noara that Alex said. She was also following the residency. She was super present in the building. Arkomatsu, it's an artist in Brazil that he research is about the city, and he speaks about the city in a very interesting way that we thought that would be really nice to make discussions with the other artworks. And we have like Sato that we are going to see in some very briefly, that it's an artist that is working with media activism, that it's a theme that is really important to the social movement because they protect the social movement from the main media narrative. So we bring the artists thinking about the themes and how they relate with these main issues, that is these three occupations: Prestes Maia, Cambridge, and 9 de Julho.
Yeah, like I think also one of the other collectives that was really important for us to work with was Dulcinea Catadora. So here you can see in this slide like their work, the collective's work. So Dulcinea Catadora is a collective from Sao Paulo. They work with again the this texture, which as I said, when you begin to notice this in the city, you really see it everywhere, which is cardboard. And they think about, questions of, like sustainability, recycling. They are themselves based in a recycling cooperative in downtown Sao Paulo, very close actually to the buildings in which we worked. And the books that you see that they produce here are called Catonera books. The collective was doing workshops in the Cambridge when we were there. And they proposed this incredible work, which we were really delighted to include in the exhibition called Lived Lexis, or in Portuguese, Vocabulário Vivido. And basically, this is the 9 books that you see there. That's those works. There are 3 in English, 3 in Spanish, and 3 in Portuguese. And if you go visit the exhibition, please feel free to leaf through them, but please do put them back because we have a limited supply. And the books speak about definitions, dictionary definitions on the one hand, and people's very lived definitions of words on the other. And the words are words like democracy or resistance or occupation or housing or justice, these kinds of very big, kind of complex, concepts. And there's this really productive kind of interplay in Dulcinea Catalora's work between these different kinds of forms of producing knowledge. And we were really delighted to include this work. And there's a video on the wall behind there where it talks about how the books themselves are made. Um, because it also speaks to the voices of the people who are living in the occupation. When you read those books, you're reading what people living in that building were writing down, what they were, what their thoughts. And I think one of the things about this question is also there's this balance between artists and collectives, but there's also the balance also of the people living in the building. And so that's why I think Dulcinea's intervention here was really important. And also Preta, her video and work is incredibly important in the show because there's that direct, space, that idea of not applying a filter. And there's another question here from TK asking, I loved about learning about the history of the building. Could you say a little bit more about the Zumbi Somos Nós sign? What's the significance of that? So yeah, like if we can sort of just skip back quite quickly, this was at the beginning. So Zumbi Somos Nós was an initiative by, as Juliana said, the Frente 3 de Fevereiro collective. And they were, as Juliana was sort of talking about, part of this earlier generation of artists working in the 2000s. So, as we were sort of saying, you have this really kind of timeline, this really 25-year timeline of collaborations between artists and activists on this question. The first wave in the early 2000s, the second wave when we were working in 2016, and now the contemporary 9 de Julho space, which came out of the Hotel Cambridge occupation. Because when the Hotel Cambridge was being developed, the families had to leave because it became a building site. So they walked 400 yards down the road and occupied the building that is now 9 de Julho. But going back to this first generation, the Prestes Maia building, Zumbi Somos Nós is a reference to Zumbi dos Palamares, a quilombola leader born in the 17th century in Brazil, who was kind of a real a pioneer, if you like, of the resistance to enslavement by the Portuguese colonial government in Brazil at the time. So a quilombo is a space where people managed to escape enslavement were found refuge and set up autonomous communities. And these are really important and continue to be, in a contemporary sense, spaces of resistance. And so Zumbi in this banner that you see here is a reference to Zumbi dos Palamares. And basically what the banner is saying is that it's kind of an ambiguous, it could be interpreted in different ways, but it's saying that we are all Zumbi, right? So everyone is Zumbi, everyone is an agent of resistance. Or it could be sort of interpreted in a different way, which is we are embodying the spirit of resistance of Zumbi.
And I think that they were also placing the occupation as a quilombo, as a place of resistance.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that Quilombo is, because obviously the first Quilombos were rural spaces. They were spaces away from the Portuguese colonial settlements where people found refuge. But increasingly, and there's an amazing developing literature on this around the idea of Quilombola thinking, Quilombola practice, which is the idea of creating an anti-racist space, but also in the city. And I think this is, Ju, what you're sort of, this is what French 13 Fevereiro was seeking to do, to create this urban quilombo, this urban space of resistance against questions of coloniality. So we have a question from Lucio Haza here. What was your expectancy, or what did you expect as curators when you started this process and invited the artists to develop an artistic residency? Jules, what were our expectations?
Hi, Lucia. So glad that you are here. I think that at that time, our idea was very experimental. We was, I think, expecting to see what's gonna happen. we 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 knew at the time that was delicate what we were doing, uh, and we faced a lot of issues during the work. But I think that was um, our interest was to get close to the movement, bring the artist close to the movement, and see uh, what we are going to see uh, grow there. I
I
would
think for
say that.
me, yeah, I think for me, like working in that space, it was a very dynamic and evolving space. Like things were constantly in flux. And as you said, it was a constant challenge in a way to put together activities and a program of activities. Um, like we faced different challenges, I think, at different points. But I think what were our expectations as curators? I think my one something that was very important for me was to really see this kind of genuine dialogue develop between different worlds, um, to be able to create pathways of transit between those worlds and spaces in which circulation could happen. Uh, very much like Dulcinea Catadora, the collective does, like with the material, you know, um, the materiality of the cardboard book, right? So the book is made of cardboard, which is recycled from the street. And that book, transits all sorts of different spaces. It goes to art fairs, it goes to book fairs, it goes into museums. It goes to all sorts of different places. But of course, it starts from a downtown recycling cooperative where cardboard is being recycled, you know, off the street. And I think that that's something that we really sought to do as well. And I think that that dialogue to try and make something possible was a priority. And I think as curators, I think a lot of our energy in that sort of early period before this exhibition, more in the artistic residency phase. And I think Jules, I think you would agree with this, right? A lot of our energy was devoted to trying to facilitate those discussions between the artists, between people in the city, between the social movement, between the people living in the building. And I think the artists also really did a good job as well of doing this. Like, so Escobar, Rafael Escobar, him and Jaime Laureano, who did their artists in residency period together, one of their initiatives was to create a series of dinners to cook for every single person in the building. And so we did a series of big communal dinners over a month. And this was their opportunity and that was their strategy to be able to meet people over food and in a communal space and to think about how what they could do that might be of use or might be interesting. And maybe Juliana, you'd like to speak about Escobar. Like we have a couple of his works here.
Yeah, I would like to mention also Julian Fuchs, because at the time we invite four artists, but one of the five artists, but one of them was a writer, and he was in the residency, and we were very inspired by a writer that at the time was invited in Documenta and published a really interesting book, and invited Julian, and he was present in the day that the movement occupy new buildings. So he released a book about a book named Occupation. The book is in the exhibition, where he speaks about the occupation of the building, the occupation of his father by a disease, and also the occupation of his wife by his son, his wife body by his son. So it's a beautiful book, just to mention some of the works that became alive from this experience. But yeah, Escobar is really interesting because this work is named Circulation. So he was in Cambridge at the time, and then he collaborated with some residents who run small business in the building, like a bakery or clothing repair shops and so on. So he developed like design and cards for this small business, and he did these backlights and give to them so they can use. But then when he make an exhibition, he also bring these cards and the backlights for the gallery. So he circulates. He usually he likes to say that he's a midfielder player because he brings to the gallery the street, and then he tried to bring the money from the art world to the streets also. So he works like this midfielder. So when he make an exhibition, he also divulga. He like help me, Alex.
Divulga, he's like kind of puts it out there. He like publicizes.
Publicize this small business. So it's really interesting, and he was one of the artists that we bring to Los Angeles because he also he do a really important work in São Paulo as an educator in the streets in the Cracolândia. That it's a place really similar to Skid Row. So we bring him to Los Angeles. He did a really incredible performance about Cracolândia in the opening. And I think Alex can speak better also about his work with the LAPD, right?
Yeah, like this was something that was really important for us to create this connection between artists in Sao Paulo and artists in LA. And so, I'm sure a lot of you know, and I see like a couple of people in the room who know very well who LAPD are. And LAPD is the Los Angeles Poverty Department. They have worked for, well, their 40-year anniversary, I think, is this year. And they've worked for a long time in Skid Row and with questions of housing, working directly with the unhoused community, and thinking about that space as a geographically kind of like demarcated space of resistance, like articulating what that neighborhood needs, and also resisting the encroachment of the city upon it. And there are so many parallels we saw between LAPD's work and Rafael Escobar's work, because Escobar's worked in the equivalent of Skid Row, Cracolândia in Sao Paulo, again, like for a very long period of time, a decade. And I think this is something that, going back to Lucia's question, like what was your expectation as curators when you started this process and invited four artists to develop a residency? I think I also had an expectation about the longitudinal nature of this work because I think that this is work that transformation doesn't occur from one day to the next. You know, it's a long process, and it's like all community processes, it takes a lot of time because it's about respecting each and every voice and finding different forms of consensus. And I think this is something that I admire about Escobar's practice because he's been working in Cracolândia, the equivalent of Skid Row, for over a decade. And something that he really focuses on in his work, and he has a video which is in the exhibition, which I hope you guys get the chance to see, which is called Son da Maloca, the Maloca sound. And this really speaks about the importance of music in Skid Row and the importance of and the connection between Skid Row and Cracolândia in that sense, how people articulate their sense of belonging or their sense of being in the city through musical practice. And the Los Angeles Poverty Department had this amazing initiative, which is every other year, it's a biennial initiative called Walk the Talk, which is kind of like a carnival parade with music and live music, walking through the streets of Skid Row and stopping at different points to hear from different people and different community spaces. And we saw such a connection between Escobar and LAPD in that sense, that being able to facilitate, bring Escobar to LA, be able to have that dialogue in LAPD's downtown space, talk about the similarities, but also the differences, you know, because LA and Sao Paulo are very different cities with different legal frameworks, different challenges. But yeah, there was something really interesting there. And in fact, we do have a clip of Escobar's video. I don't know whether the sound will play, um, but yeah, just to give you, even if the sound doesn't play, it's the kind of the visual like idea of what Cracolândia looks like and how similar visually it is to Skid Row.
Lembrar de um grande amor que nas pistas eu encontrei aqui no centro. Eu vi, me apaixonei, porque além de bonita, bem linda, de ser bem vista, perfeita classe compôs que me intimida. Mesmo vendo a classe compôs, me aproximei. Com as meias palavras, foi dito o que eu pensei. Com as meias palavras do abraço, ganhei um beijo. Ela me apertava bem forte daquele jeito. Então, um pancadão tocando ali no baile, eu falando para elas.
Okay, so we probably can't like spend too much time on this, but I always thought it was really important to show just a quick clip of Escobar's work. And featured in his work here are MC Cauex, MC Meia-Noite, and also Denis Alberto. And this kind of aesthetic, the way of working in this very kind of careful, longitudinal, community embedded way, it was something that we saw a really, really strong parallel with LAPD, and we were really happy to be able to facilitate that connection. So we also have a question actually here from Stephen. Some of the featured projects engage directly with urban infrastructure like housing, transportation, public space. What role do you think art can play in reimagining how we live together in cities today? Juliana, do you want to jump in?
Well, I think that we can see this in the exhibition, like with the work of cartoneiras or in the work of Rafael Escobar, or in the work of Santos. Or I think that it's really interesting for me to see in the exhibition the 3 moments of Prestes Maia, Cambridge, and 9 de Julho. We see like that in 9 de Julho we have, in Cambridge the movement was more close to the public. Now 9 de Julho it's a really artistic place in São Paulo. People goes there to parties, to shows, theaters, We have like a really live place in São Paulo. Yeah, I think that the art is the really core of this. And I think that Carmen, the leader of the movement, she understands this. She gave space to the artists because she understood that they were like protectors for the movement and for the fight.
Yeah, like I think that, I think, this idea of what role can art play in, reimagining, how we live together in the city. I think that, this was one of the questions that we had to sort of figure out, going back to Phyllis's question earlier on, like how long did the show take to kind of, put together and think about? This was one of the really important early questions for us, which was, in what sense, what kind of thing are we putting forward here? Are we putting forward something that is supposed to be like a didactic thing, or is it a more speculative thing? And I think our conclusion was that, in the show, like we don't really tell anyone like what to think about, you know, the unhoused community, or questions around the right to a home, or anything like that, really. What we try and do is really try and give a glimpse into a different world, right, which is Sao Paulo. And yes, it's a city with a lot of similarities to LA, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, what's going to work in Sao Paulo would work in LA. But at the same time, we also don't know that. So I think that this idea of the role that art can play, I think that it really allows us to imagine different solutions. It allows us to kind of think about approaching these questions from a different perspective. Um, and I think also that the type of art that is put forward in this exhibition, going back to that question around collectives and this very sort of, central connection that we worked so closely with the MSTC, over a long period of time, is that notion of from where these ideas emerge, and how they emerge. They emerge through consensus. They emerge through a long-term practice. They're not kind of dreamt up by like a single person, working at a desk. They come from kind of lived experience, embodied experience. And that was something that we really tried to work with, I think, in the exhibition, this idea of what does the body in these, what does the body in these public spaces, what does it propose? What kind of different alternative imaginaries does it propose? So while there's something very, very tangible, right, that happened in Sao Paulo, which is a building was abandoned, it was occupied, we did our artistic residency work there, and now the people that occupied that building own those apartments, for a down payment. I think, I don't know exactly how much they paid, but it's a very token amount. There's a very tangible transformation there. But at the same time, there's also this speculative thing of like, well, it allows us to just think about things in a different way. Like, for example, Ocean Plaza in LA, the towers, the three towers that were graffitied recently in downtown LA. Those buildings have been standing there empty for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and the city has spent $40 million protecting those buildings. Why should public money be dedicated toward protecting empty buildings that serve no social purpose, and the owner of which built those buildings has run up a huge debt with the city? Like that kind of scenario, I think, is something that the people we were working with in Sao Paulo, they really wanted to explore, like how to question those kinds of norms. So we got a last question here from Karen. Thanks for your question, Karen. How do you hope visitors will engage with construction occupation? Are there particular ideas or questions you hope that people will walk away with? Juliana, do you want to?
I think that this is really a singular experience, right? This exhibition, I think that it's an exhibition that brings a lot of research questions, material to think. I think that if a person enters and feels something in one piece of work, I think that it's already amazing. I don't know. I don't know what to respond. What do you think, Alex?
I think for me, yeah, I think I kind of go back to that idea, that we wanted to really kind of open up this window into a different world, in a very respectful way, like an exhibition that, we've remained in, constant dialogue with the MSTC, the social movement, and also with people who lived in the building, of course, with the artists as well. This really particular community of artists that grew up around this space, this physical space, which afforded protection to them, afforded a space to come together. So I think that perhaps it's this glimpse into a different world that I would like people to kind of walk away with, the idea of um, kind of seeing also how a different sort of artistic process can lead to unexpected outcomes. I think that the way we work curatorially, since 2016, in this kind of non-hierarchical way, working in a very collaborative way, really seeking to kind of bring forward like a whole range of different voices. I think it kind of puts forward a different perspective on some of these questions that we've addressed around art and activism, or around the question of the right to a home, the question of how people create spaces of resistance in the city. So I think, yeah, like these are things that I would hope that people kind of through this kind of very like personal, as Juliana says, it's very personal connection with the work, um, that people might kind of sort of think about different outcomes, and how different processes can generate really different outcomes that are surprising and unexpected, and that not everything is a given. I think that's something that I felt very much when I was in Sao Paulo. I remember the first time that I walked into the 9 de Julho occupation, the one that is still up and running. Where I remember Juliana, we were in there together early on. I remember thinking, how could this space like come to house families and come to be a safe space for families? And of course, now it's much more than that. It's all of that and a lot more. It's, as Juliana was saying, it's a cultural center. It hosts an amazing food delivery program for the unhoused community. Every week they produce 500 meals. So there's this sense of like becoming that at that time when I was there, I couldn't really see. But I think that's the kind of the power of community and artistic process, that it kind of allows something to happen which you can't necessarily see when you're there in that moment. And I think that was something very powerful that we explored. And I hope people kind of explore or can feel that when they walk through the exhibition. I don't know, Juliana, would you like to speak about anything to kind of close with, or are there any kind of like works that you might like to address on top of this?
No, I think that there is a lot of works. We highlight some of them today. In this image, we have the work of Sato. He's a multimedia artist, activist, and in this series, Occupation, he records the 2015 high school student protests in São Paulo, when teenagers occupied their schools to oppose a government plan to close nearly 100 schools. And after 2 months of resistance, the plan was revoked and the movement spread to other parts of Brazil. It was a really strong event. And so Sato picture this moment, and we want to bring him to the exhibition because he's a independent journalist, and the independent journalism is really important for this kind of movement because they help to bring a more realistic narrative. And yeah, I think that if we can close, and I hope you can go to the exhibition and see the show. It was a really good introduction, and yeah.
Yes. A big thank you to Alex and Juliana for sharing such thoughtful insight into construction occupation and the powerful role art can play in shaping space, community, and public life. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. To experience these works firsthand, we encourage you to visit Construction Occupation on view now at the Fowler Museum at UCLA until January 11, 2026. Today's program has been recorded and will be available on the Fowler Museum website in the coming weeks, so you'll be able to revisit the conversation or share it with friends and colleagues. To stay up to date on upcoming programs and exhibitions, visit our website or follow us on social media at Fowler Museum. And if you'd like to support what we do, please consider becoming a Fowler member. Your support helps make programs like this possible. We appreciate your time and participation, and we hope to see you again at our next program. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.